Hello everyone, Screenplay Archaeology host KiramidHead here. Before we get into today's episode, I just want to get some intro stuff out of the way. First things first, we are now part of the Fandom Limb Media podcast network, so I'm going to link their site down below. And that's why you would have just heard a promo for another podcast, because they're another one of the shows on the network. And as per usual, if you like the show and you'd like to know more, you can check out our social media pages on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, and even Instagram now. The show also has a Patreon if you're willing to gift money, but you don't really need to if you don't want to. And we also have a Discord server, which you can join if you want to chat with, the group members there. So that link is going to be down below as well. So yeah, sit back, guys, and enjoy the show. All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Screenplay Archaeology podcast. I'm your host, KiramidHead, and tonight I'm bringing you a new episode at long last. I finally figured something out, and it's going to be another solo episode, but this should be a fun one. Hopefully. I just recorded it, and then the audio fucked up, so hopefully it works this time. But I'm going to be covering Maximum King, a spec script written by Shay Hatton, about the coked-up production of Maximum Overdrive, the only film ever directed by Stephen King himself. And it's an interesting, funny, but fictionalized, heavily comedic take on that story. And just to give a little bit of background, Shay Hatton as a writer is one I mostly like. He ended up on the blacklist twice. This was his first spec he put out, and ended up on the 2016 blacklist. And then the year after that, Ballerina, his action spec, ended up on the blacklist again. And so that got bought up by Lionsgate. They eventually turned it into the John Wick spinoff, which I haven't seen. But I like that. I liked those two scripts, and I liked the two John Wick movies he wrote. They had problems, but I kind of don't attribute them to him because there's like 4 other writers on like the third one, and then on the fourth one, that's mainly an editing issue, I think, because I just think that movie's way too long. I haven't seen Army of the Dead or its spin-off. I haven't seen the 2 Rebel Moon movies, which those are ones I keep meaning to watch, but I mean, they're Netflix movies, so they feel kind of disposable to me a lot of the time. And then there's there's Day Shift, which was another Netflix movie, which I haven't seen, but just based on his writing and the couple movies I've seen, I like him as a writer. I'm also a bit of a Stephen King fan. I grew up in a household where my mother read all his books. She also tried to get as many hardcover editions as she can. So I was kind of primed for that. I haven't read anywhere near all of his stuff because he's an insanely prolific writer, but I think not everything he does is great, but when he hits, he really hits. So this is an interesting sort of bit of lore. Now, Maximum Overdrive, which is the only movie he ever directed. I haven't read the short story it's based on, but I read the synopsis of it. It's an interesting watch because the first 40 minutes or so was a pretty entertaining, if kind of stupid B-movie. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's watchable. And then towards the middle, it gets kind of boring when the people are under siege from the trucks that come to life. And then they get enslaved and forced to pump gas. And that's not the most interesting part either. It's a bit of a mess. But, and then it picks up again and gets kind of fun near the end. So, yeah, that's an interesting movie. I've watched it a few times. So the story of the production was apparently completely insane, even without the comedic stylings of the screenplay. So we're just going to dive right into it. And so it's called Maximum King by Shay Hatton, a sorta true story, as it says on the title page, acknowledging its, most largely fictitious nature in the way he approaches it. And so it opens in a bathroom in 1985 as a nose comes into frame and snorts a giant line of coke through a $100 bill. We then go to a close-up of a 36-year-old Stephen King as he gives a lengthy, coked-out monologue. And my apologies to both Shay Hatton and Stephen King for what I'm about to do, but I do intend to read the whole thing. So yeah, here goes. Okay, so get this. How do you follow it up, right? That's what I'm thinking. You get an idea about Haunted Hotel, then bam, you write it. $1 million, movie deal. Movie was shit. Who cares? What's next? No. What's before that? Girl to prom. Blood everywhere. Bam, another hit. They keep coming. Vampires, bam, million. The Stand, the fucking Stand. Are you kidding? Got 300 pages of that thing still sitting in a drawer. Hasn't ever seen the light of day. Little girl, fucking bam, zing, boom, blowing shit up with her mind. What's next? What's after that? The dog, right? I wrote them with the dog. Oh, people like that. People fucking loved that. It's insidious. It speaks to the minds of people as what? Right. This is what I'm saying. We got a car, not a normal car. It's fucking killing people all over the place, over here, over there. A little kid's cat comes back to life. No, that's not enough, is it? He comes back to life. You remember that one, Dan? You remember the reviews? The critics weren't so on board for that. Called me twisted. Well, maybe I am. Ha ha ha. Don't even get me started about, okay, you know the one with the gunslinger? Oh, there's a sequel to that coming down the pipes. Maybe 2, maybe 7. You're not going to believe where that shit's going to go. So here's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, a decade ago, I lived in a trailer. But look at me now. Bing, bam, boom. Here I am. And the question is, how do you follow it up? Well, here's what I'm saying is, I got it. I know how you follow it up. How you follow it up is a brief pause, a slight reprieve from this coked out rant. Picture it, Dan. Picture it. There's a guy, right? A normal man. Well, mostly. He's got a wife, a daughter, but he's a fat fucking pig of a man, oinky oink, takes his body for granted, takes everything for granted. Then one day he's driving down the street with his wife, and his wife is fucking and sucking him off, right? So where's his mind at? It's not on the road, that's for sure. And then bam, hits a gypsy. He hits a gypsy with his car. Then his other fucking gypsy, she looks at him, she's like, dinner. She whispers a curse, so he starts losing weight, right? Starts losing it real slow at first. And at first he's like, great, drop some pounds, please the wife. But it keeps happening, skinnier and skinnier. Oh no, what does he do? He finds a friend, tracks his bitch down, right? Boom, friend gets shot through the hand. And how does it end? How does it all end? That's what you're asking, right? That's what you're wondering. 3 words. Magic fucking pie. A murder pie, if you will. And why wouldn't you? But the wrong people eat it. His wife, his daughter, they eat it by accident. This man, this skinny fucker, he crumbles into despair. And that is how you write an ending. Boom, fuck you very much. What do you think? And that is a very fun little monologue there. Very funny. Lots of references to King's writing. And we see that he's in the office of his literary agent, Dan Jansen. Dan tells him that Dino De Laurentiis' people have called and offered to let King direct the movie himself. He says he'll think about it and drives off, blaring AC/DC, while the man in black sits in the passenger seat and watches. King then circles back to his office and says he'll do it, but only if he gets to write the script, and drives off again. He literally doesn't even get out of the car. And the man in black described as a Matthew McConaughey-looking motherfucker because his casting was recent at the time. He's still in the passenger seat, and we get a disclaimer on screen that says, this is a sort of true and sort of made up story. I mean, it's true, but sort of embellished for, dramatic effect. Sorry, Stephen King. And of course, the man in black sets up the theme of, in the midst of Stephen King's drug habit, he is, hallucinating, the characters he writes and talking to them. And they sort of represent his inner demons. And that's a cool idea. The idea that the man in black is like the most deep-seated one. And he stops by the local high school in Bangor, Maine to pick up his kids, Naomi and Joe, who are upset he didn't wait in the car because he creeps people out. And he actually does stop and scare another kid, which is pretty funny. And on the way home, he has Naomi hold the wheel, saying he dropped a quarter, but is really bending over to take another bump of cocaine. And back at home, King feeds his other son, Owen, who's 4 and in a high chair, doing the, here comes the airplane thing, while just being a weird, creepy, insane man and scaring the hell out of him. And so he and his wife Tabitha, they discussed a directing idea, with King blabbering about not knowing which story he should adapt, even mentioning redoing The Shining and doing it right. And Tabitha goes, but I liked Kubrick's film. He goes, you're always honest with me and I love you for it. I didn't. And he says directing is something he feels like he has to do because, like, moving from a trailer to a house, going from a writer to a director is moving up. Besides, how hard can it be, he says. And he assures her that, he has everything under control, meaning his habits, but we all know that's not actually the case. And so over dinner, Naomi makes this comment that maybe people at school think she's too short. And that gives King the idea to adapt a short story instead of one of his novels, and retires to his office, starts digging through the copies he has of his short stories. A hallucination of Jack Torrance appears, very pointedly the movie version, and King even calls him out for quoting the movie and not the book. And this is an interesting choice because, of course, Jack Torrance is a representation of his own substance abuse issues, and using the nastier movie version of the character almost seems like it's playing into the idea that King hates that characterization so much because he's afraid that he could become that guy. That's just me interpreting and speculating, but I think it's a solid enough line of thought. But Torrance, talks him into doing more cocaine and downing some whiskey. And King then seems to settle on the raft, but then Annie Wilkes appears and tells him, no, George Romero's already using it for Creepshow too. And he's like, right, wait a minute, who are you? Oh, you haven't written me yet, but I'm still in here, tapping her head. And then they have a discussion because he says, oh, you're going to chop that writer fellow's foot off with an axe. She goes, or break him with a sledgehammer. You haven't decided yet. And he goes, no, I'm pretty sure you're going to chop one off, which is a reference to the differences between the book and the film Misery. And so King then considers The Mist, and she's like, no, there's no ending there. He goes like, what if I kill them all off? Even the kid? Nah, that would never work, which is a meta reference to how the movie ends compared to the book. The novella, I should say. And so we get a montage. No, wait, I skipped ahead. He then hits on adapting a short story called Trucks, which is the one where they come to life and kill people. Now, this isn't actually how Trucks got selected. It's actually stranger, because there was a producer called Milton Subotsky who made a bunch of horror anthologies in the 70s, including Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror. Like Asylum was one of them. And he picked up the rights to a few King stories, wanting to do one about machines. And so he picked Lawnmower Man, Trucks, and The Mangler, but that didn't end up happening for some reason. And then Dino picked up the rights, wasn't interested in doing, Dino De Laurentiis picked up the rights, wasn't interested in doing an anthology, so he said, just do Trucks, apparently. I get why, for the sake of, dramatic effect, that's not in here, but I do think that's an interesting story. And so he tells Tabitha about it, and she's like, well, why did they come to life? And goes like, oh no, comet, alien technology, which is referring to the fact that there's contradictory explanations given in the film Maximum Overdrive. And she asks him how the script is coming along, and he goes, oh yeah, heads off to start writing. So we get a montage where King is seemingly so high he transcends time, referencing the Mighty Ducks and singing 1985 by Bowling for Soup. And even Jack Torrance is like, how the hell are you doing that? That song doesn't exist yet. Fuck you, Jack, you're not real. And King just has another beer. And so 3 days later, King emerges with a 250-page screenplay, now titled Maximum Overdrive, to Dan's office, where he says he won't do the job unless AC/DC does the soundtrack. And he's convinced he can get in the room with Angus Young to pitch the idea because, as he put it, I wrote Pet Sematary. And so King heads down to Portland where AC/DC is having a show. He meets with Angus Young and Brian Johnson in a diner where he sells them on the soundtrack idea before heading to the bathroom where he and Brian do cocaine off each other's bodies. And so Brian takes a hit off of King's hand. King takes a hit off of Brian's forehead, and then Brian goes, get your dick out. And King goes, what? And then we get to a dark, more serious scene where King is getting into his car and his nose is profusely bleeding from the cocaine use. And he just nonchalantly stuffs it with tissues that are in the car because he's prepared because this has happened before. And I like how the dark shit kind of creeps into this over the course of the script. And then eventually there is a tone shift where the humor gets a bit darker and the content gets a bit darker. And that's a clever way this thing is written. And King then meets with Dino De Laurentiis in the bar, and he readily signs off on the movie, saying, even if it's shit, we'll make money off of your name. And he goes, yeah, we made money off of Firestarter, didn't we? Which is funny because the original Firestarter wasn't that good, and the remake somehow ended up being even worse. And so King says he wants Robert Redford for the lead, which is eerie as hell because as of recording, this is the day it was announced that he died. So, rest in peace, Robert. Weird coincidence there. And then Dino's like, he's too expensive, and he suggests Emilio Estevez because he's the son of Martin Sheen, who was already in a King production, even though he was really in 2. So he's basically part of the King family. And what's interesting is that in reality, apparently, King suggested Bruce Springsteen for the lead, and Dino didn't know who that was. He says, oh yeah, Emilio, look at his arms. He'll attract a young female audience. Also, he's probably fucking his way through half of Manhattan right now. And we cut to Emilio's apartment in Manhattan where he is balls deep in Demi Moore because they were dating at the time. And he's going like, oh, you're so hot. You're so famous. If we filmed this, we could sell the tape for a lot of money. And she tells him to shut up. And that in mid-sex, he gets the call offering him the job. And so King has potential actors flown out to Bangor to do auditions in his house. And at the Man in Black's suggestion, he takes mushrooms beforehand, so he's high as hell. He then is being completely insane with Emilio, and the way the audition goes is he puts his hands in the air, says, I'm a truck, woo, and then runs at him and goes, good, you got the job. And he meets with Yardley Smith, who famously would go on to be the voice of Lisa Simpson. She is in the movie playing a side character. And in the movie, she screams a lot, so the audition in the script is him having her say the line, say, give it more, until she just screams it. And it's funny because the line he has her read is one of the few she doesn't scream in the movie. And then we get introduced to Laura Harrington, who plays the love interest in the movie. And she's driving up to the house. She's talking to her agent on a boxy 80s cell phone. And she said, but listen, I want fame. I don't want to be in some crappy horror movie. And she hears Emilio Estevez is going to star, and she decides she's going to seduce him to cause a scandal and get famous. This is one of the things I really don't like in this, because I think the Emilio Estevez stuff just isn't that good or interesting. This is actively just kind of off-putting, because you're basically just turning this person who probably didn't do any of this shit into like a secondary villain of the screenplay, because you needed to pad time out, I guess. It's not that funny. It's not that interesting. You could easily take this shit out and it wouldn't change anything. And she also reads from the sex scene for her audition, which is a generous way to describe that scene in the movie, and that gets her the role. So as King says goodbye to his family, Joe hands him a story he's written, and King just stuffs it into his pocket and leaves. A short travel montage follows of King, Laura, and Emilio making their way to Wilmington, North Carolina, which is where the film was shot. King meets with Dino at the set of the Dixie Boy truck stop, which is the main location of the film. And he mentions, I'm here because we're also filming this film called Blue Velvet at the same time, which actually didn't start filming for a few more months. But we get this funny line where he says, that Kyle MacLachlan, biggest dick I've ever seen on a man. Oh, he shows his dick in the movie? No, why? And so they hold a table read with the entire cast on the set. King asks them to point out any logic issues since he wrote it so quickly, and they mainly just ask him about the weird dialogue like happy asshole and road twitch, and he just kind of brushes that off. But he does seem to acknowledge Yardley Smith's comment about how, why do the trucks attack people but the car we're driving never does anything, because, her and her character's husband drive a car for like most of their screen time in the movie. And he just kind of goes, that's a good idea, I'll think about it. Now, that's something that's not actually that's something that's more something that got lost in adaptation, because in the short story from what I was reading, it's just large vehicles that come to life, and they very specifically destroy all the smaller cars. But in the movie, it's trucks, planes, lawnmowers, vending machines. It's all kinds of machines get taken over, except for cars. Cars are the big exception. In fact, there's even a scene in the movie where a video game cabinet comes to life and kills Giancarlo Esposito, a very young Giancarlo Esposito. And with all the referencing things that don't exist yet, I'm honestly surprised they didn't mention him and do a Breaking Bad reference, because that would be obvious. But I get that he just doesn't come up at all in this. And so at 4 a.m. on the first day of filming, King can't sleep and calls Tabby, who falls asleep in the middle of the call, and that's when Annie, Jack, and the Man in Black appear again. I will say I would have liked to have seen more King characters show up. More do show up eventually, but the majority of the script, it's just this 3, and it does get a little repetitive. And they push him to do even more drugs, saying if he fucks up, he could end up living in a trailer again. And the trailer even appears in the motel room with him. That's a neat little visual. Kind of reminds me of the convenience store in The Ritual. And so King gets pumped up on drugs and goes to shoot on the first day, where he meets the cinematographer Armando Nanuzzi, whom he doesn't remember meeting before on Silver Bullet. And King gives a small speech to the crew, shoots the first scene, which is his cameo, where an ATM calls him an asshole, which is literally the first scene of the movie. And that night, Emilio visits Laura in her hotel room because he wants to talk to her and discuss his doubts about, King's competence and his drug use and how it's affecting him. And then Laura, she admits to flirting during the audition and tries to seduce him right there. She even says, "What's up, Mighty Ducks?" And it's like, that's the second Mighty Ducks reference, guys. Emilio was in other movies you can reference. But, it doesn't work, and he leaves. On day 2, they shoot the baseball field scene where a Little League coach gets hit in the balls with a soda can from a vending machine that comes to life, and then gets hit in the head and killed. And the actor playing the coach is like, so is this thing going to hurt my dick? And they're like, no, it's going to be cardboard. But the stunt guy's like, well, you could wear a protective. And he goes, no, he's fine. That hits him. And he's like, oh, it really hurt my dick. And then you get Yardley Smith and John Short, who plays her husband in the movie. They're talking about how erratic King is. Like, John's like, he's got other things on his mind, like coke. And then Smith mentions like, oh, I'm going to start going for The Simpsons. There's a line in the movie that's eat my shorts. Maybe they can use it. Yeah, she's in The Simpsons, so we have to make a reference, I guess. And so later that night, King tries to reach Tabby on the phone, and when she doesn't pick up, Jack Torrance appears again, props him into dropping acid. And so he's watching TV before it fully kicks in. He's watching The Twilight Zone. Rod Serling directly addresses him. And then Torrance appears on the screen and crawls out of it. He says, "Ooh, I'm like that girl from The Ring." And King goes, "What in God's name is The Ring?" "Dunno, it doesn't exist yet." So they're kind of hammering the, "oh, this thing doesn't exist yet" joke into the ground too. And he says, "Either way, the point is, here's Johnny." And King goes, "Fuck you. You don't say that. You only say that in the movie. You're going to quote Kubrick to me. Crawl back into that TV." But then Jack's like, here's some Jack Daniels, which leads into this bad trip of all kinds of imagery. And King wakes up the next morning hungover, gets a call from Dino saying he's late to shoot the scene where an ice cream truck flips over, which is a thing in the movie where like an ice cream truck shows up earlier and is stalking the kid character and then turns up at the end, gets blown up with a rocket launcher because it's not mentioned in the script, but Pat Hingle's character runs the truck stop and is also like a gun runner. It's a very weird plot point just so they can get some explosions and shit going on. But yeah, and so he energizes himself by doing more coke and heads over to the set, and they're getting ready to film the stunt scene where the ice cream truck flips over. And when Dino says it's all set up and he'll barely have to direct, he takes that as a challenge, orders the stunt driver to go faster, which Armando objects to and takes the camera operator's place. Now, this could have been interesting if they kept in the actual fact that his camera operators were his family members. It could have added a bit more drama here, but they didn't do that. The truck flips, but goes sideways instead of end over end, comes right towards Armando, and it really does look like it's about to hit the camera in the movie. And he's pissed off, but everyone is so jazzed about getting the shot, they don't listen to his warning that someone could get hurt. And so Emilio gets a call from Demi Moore, and she begins to get suspicious about him and his co-star Laura, so she says she's flying down there to visit him. Then we get a montage of scenes being filmed, but it actually turns into a montage of King getting drunk. And it ends with him drinking in like all 9 squares, Hollywood Squares style. And so his family comes to visit him. They attend a small amusement park, and King sneaks off to a porta-john to snort more coke, giving himself a migraine. And we find out he completely forgot about Joe's short story that he was supposed to read. And so they leave the airport. His family decides to leave at the airport. Tabby says she's not stupid. She knows he's back on the drugs. Has him promise to try sobering up. And then as he leaves, you get this weird scene where Emilio shows up to pick up Demi. And then in increasingly smaller lines of text to the point where I had to zoom in to read it. Very Alfred Bester of Shea Hatton here. They start making out, ripping each other's clothes off, fucking in the airport, and then the TSA guys start jerking off. Weird moment you threw in there. So back on the set, King actually does try to sober up, refuses cocaine from Jack Torrance. They then go into filming the movie's sex scene, which is really more just like a post-coital scene where they're talking. And it also happens to be the first scene Demi watches while visiting. And so Laura whispers to Emilio going, "We could do something here. I saw it in a French movie. It'll be really hot." And so he licks the sweat off her forehead, which is a real thing that happens in the movie, but they make a bigger deal out of it in this script. Because in the movie, he just kind of wipes the sweat off her head, licks her fingers, and the movie goes on. And here they're acting like it's this big salacious thing that happens. And I'm like, it's kind of a nothing moment in the actual movie. But he does it because he thinks it's going to make the scene look authentic. But all it does is piss off Demi. Then Shooting That Day wraps up with the waitress making a "we made you" monologue, which she actually has 2 of in the movie, which is pretty repetitive. But in the movie, what happens is she runs outside, and there's like a weird military, like tiny Jeep with a huge machine gun mounted on it, which guns her down. So they film that scene, and then King announces that they're going to use the set for a party tonight to celebrate how well the filming is going. And then, that night, he's setting up the party. Armando arrives. He's the first to show up. They discuss the differences they've been having about safety, and King, who is genuinely trying to do better at this point, says, "Let's just try to be friends." And so the party gets into full swing, but King isn't enjoying it because, he's suffering from intense social anxiety that the drugs usually help with. Heads to the bathroom where Margaret White appears, says things like, "They're all going to laugh at you." And that basically prods him into taking some uppers and drinking. And he becomes the life of the party because of the drugs. AC/DC arrives, and King asks, "You flew all the way here from Australia?" He goes Angus says, "Oh yeah, I'll go anywhere where I can get pussy." And they play Who Made Who, the song written for the movie, which is an actual thing. They actually did write a song for the movie. I don't know how he got AC/DC to do that in real life, but crazier things have happened, I guess. And then, they invite him to come on stage and sing with them, and he just belts out Highway to Hell badly, but, the energy is good and people are cheering him on. We go into the back room where Emilio and Demi are making out, and she still is suspicious about him and Laura, who happens to walk in, and she admits that she did try to seduce him, but Emilio said no, and then they realize what she's doing, trying to get fame, and they walk out. And then AC/DC, they offer another song to King, and he goes, okay, I'm going to sing Back in Black, but I'm going to do it as a duet with Armando. So they launch into that, and the party continues. But then the next morning, King is hungover again. There's a somewhat more ominous atmosphere, and he gets another call from Dino saying he's late to set. So he heads over, and they're shooting the scene where the child actor gets chased through the suburbs by a lawnmower. And then King said, and they say like, oh, let me pull up my notes. Yeah, and Dino asks if he's up to directing, but that makes him angry, and so he goes, hey, stunt guy, put real blades in the mower, despite the fact audiences will never see them, and drive it twice as fast as planned. And he really did tell them to put real blades in the lawnmower, which led to what happens next. The most fucked up thing about the production, definitely. And so Armando starts to object, but he keeps quiet because of his new friendship with King, and the filming begins. It quickly goes wrong with the lawnmower veering out of control, hitting a wooden beam used as a camera support, and the blades chop into the wood, and he does another typographical thing here where, like, it's done in, like, 7 short lines on top of each other that get increasingly bigger until the last line is underlined. The wood chip flies off in slow motion and hits Armando in the eye and gets lodged there. Armando is taken to the hospital, and the doctor says that it looks like he'll keep the eye. Dino then lays into King. He's angry that King said that, it's a load off his back. And then he says he wants this cursed film wrapped up quickly. Then King visits Armando, who calls him a tub of shit, says he blinded him, but he really blinded him with kindness and made him forget that he was a moron. And he says, King, you have to realize you are the one who is really blind here, and tells him to leave. And shooting soon ends. King says goodbye to everyone. He drives home, coming into the driveway way too fast, and a ton of beer cans fall out of the car when he exits it. And then after dinner, Tabby's saying, oh, we should relax, take a vacation, but King can't because he fast-tracked post-production, has to be in LA. And then but then she's angry. She doesn't care. That even says he's writing a new book. And so Jack Torrance appears to encourage him to work on the book, which turns out to be the Tommyknockers. Now, actually, that was his first novel after he sobered up, and he hates that book because he thinks that, like, it's way too much a metaphor for his addiction, and it's just too obvious. But so that's a fictionalization here. And he soon arrives in LA, and they play out the 3-hour music-free assembly cut, which he goes, great, no notes. But then the guy says it's 3 hours long with no music, so he says, okay, run it again. We get a montage of him in the editing room, and then just doing random shit in LA, including watching Rocky IV, which would not have been out till Christmas, but whatever. And then he's in like a theater on stage singing with Bowling for Soup, just a repeated gag we didn't need to repeat. And he turns his final cut into the studio, and the executives who watch the screening are like, what do we do with this? Well, we've had worse. Really? Where was I when we had the worst screening? I don't know. Jerking off in your office? Hey, fuck you, Bobby. It was one time. Actual dialogue. And then one of them is like, I know how we can market this. Market it on King himself. So we're going to put him in the trailer. They also put him on the poster, which is a bizarre poster. And this is a real trailer. You can watch it on YouTube. One thing they don't mention here is that they actually played Halloween 3 music in that trailer. And it's just King addressing the audience, acting weird, intercut with random bits of the movie. And so he's having trouble remembering his lines. And then the man in black appears, gets him to start snorting coke again. And it's all filmed in a single take, and King leaves immediately afterwards. He returns home to Maine, where he finds that Tabby has set up an intervention for him, and they mention he had one 5 years before, and that it didn't take. And so she takes a bag, pours out all the drugs of his she found in the house, and it just takes a comically long time. She says, you've been home for 3 days in the last month. This is from 3 days. And that's what gets him to sit down and listen. And so everyone talks about how he's hurt them. Dino's there. He says that, Armando is in fact going to lose his eye. The doctor is wrong, and now he's going to sue both of us. Dan's there. He says, hey, I moved out here to represent you specifically, and you maybe could ruin both our careers now. And then Naomi and Joe both mention their own issues, specifically Joe with his story that King doesn't even remember at this point. And then he looks at Owen, sitting in his high chair, who speaks in a British accent, saying, Father, you have been a disappointment. And King says, well, I guess I am still high, still a little high. Then Tabby goes, that's the problem. You're always high. You have to stop. And then, egged on by a vision of the Man in Black, he launches into a tirade, which is actually, I'm going to have to read this one because it's actually very good. Because I don't stop. I never stop. Don't you get that? We lived in a trailer 10 years ago. A fucking trailer, or did you forget? My mom died and all I've done is work. I worked to get us a house and to get my book published and to get another book published and another book and another book. And I worked to fuck a baby into you and another and another. And I worked to keep us moving up and up and up. And we're still moving up. We're still fucking moving up. It's all because I don't stop. If I stop, what happens then? We go back like the nothing we were before, back in the fucking trailer. That's not us, not me. I'm not going to be alone again. Living is going. And if I stop, I die. And Tabby responds with, Jesus Christ, Steve, what the fuck are you talking about? If you stop, we're here. If you stop, we're all still here like we were before. Don't you see that? And he says he has to go to promote the movie, and she tells him not to come back. So things have definitely gone off the rails with his family at this point. And we didn't see him go on a Canadian morning show, and an awkward as hell interview ensues. And this is a real interview. There's a hyperlink to it on YouTube in the script. There was one for the trailer as well. And he says, what do you want? Oh, I guess I want a pair of lizard skin boots. And it is awkward as hell. We then go to the premiere where Laura tries to win over Emilio yet again, but he rejects her one final time, comparing her to King's need to stay on top. You know, he's doing all this stuff. You're trying to fuck your way to the top. But love is all that matters. I'm going to propose to Demi because she's the one. And that's why the Emilio stuff is weak, because it's all setting up for this punchline of, oh, those two don't actually get married. Meh. It's also weird reading all this Demi Moore stuff after she's had this comeback with The Substance, where she's just kind of this throwaway character here. It's very weird in retrospect. And so King tries to talk to Dino again, who bluntly tells him that the movie is shit, calls him out on his family not being there, and spits on the ground before storming off. And this is a choice I find very interesting here. Did they make Dino the one who talks sense to King in a couple scenes? Because Dino, whenever you hear of him, he always comes off like a pretty comical figure. Like, he didn't know a lot about American culture. He could barely speak English. You know, he was a small man with a ridiculously big desk, as Arnold Schwarzenegger likes to say. And so having him be the sane one compared to Stephen King is just an interesting contrast if you know anything about him. And so we go to King in a bar, drinking fingers of vodka, watching a television report on the film's dismal box office where one of them says, oh, Leonard Maltin told me that it raped him in his eye hole, so obviously he's hallucinating. And so he steps out the back door to the rear parking lot where he is confronted by Jack Torrance, who tries to give him the drink again, and Carrie White, who's covered in blood. And King's like, finally has had enough. He's finally going to quit. He starts throwing all the shit out of his jacket on the ground and breaks a bottle, cuts Jack's throat, and then Carrie tries to choke him psychically, and then he pulls out an imaginary gun, shoots her in the head. Charlie McGee appears, tries to burn him alive, and he goes, you think I never killed a child in one of my books before? Kicks her in the face. So we get this whole sequence of him fighting his demons in the forms of the fictional characters he has created, which is a really interesting idea, especially because Jack Torrance very much fits that mold. The others less so, but they're there more for fun. Torrance is the thematic. Torrance and the Man in Black are the thematic ones. The others are just there to have a laugh about. And Carrie shows up, chases him into the woods. Christine, the car, chases him into the woods, crashes into a creek bed. Cujo shows up, chases King around. He stabs it to death with a imaginary Bowie knife before falling into the creek. And then the Man in Black stands over him. And I'm going to have to read this bit of dialogue out because this is one of my favorite parts. All right, you got me. You going to kill me? Considers then, nah, you got more living to do. But remember, I always come back. He taps his head, then turns and walks away. That is some of the best writing the Man in Black has gotten in a movie. And this movie doesn't exist. This is better writing for him than some of the actual adaptations have. I love this idea of him being the darkness inside you that never goes away. That part of King that will always be there at the back of his head. That is wonderful writing. I love it. And so King, he passes out in the creek. He wakes up the next morning with a nearly empty bottle of scotch in his hands, and he just drops it in the creek. And as it floats away, he's kind of snuck in between two lines of description. It says, they all float down here, so you see where his mind is going. And King returns home. He sincerely tells Tabby that he's done, and he convinces her. And they They go through the house together, gather up all his drugs, throw it away. He talks to Joe, gives him his notes on his short story, and they sit on the couch and they watch Jaws 2 together. And so King sits down in his office and he starts working on the manuscript for It, which I have a hard time believing was a book he wrote sober, considering some of the shit that happens in that, but they're probably fudging the timeline a bit here. And we then go to the Bangor Public Library, where he reads a portion of the manuscript in front of a small crowd. And then as they leave, King asks Tabby to have some time to himself, just a little bit, not him and cocaine, just him. So he climbs up a ladder onto the roof of the library and watches the sunset, and that's where the script ends. That's a great image to end on, but I feel like his recovery is a little too abbreviated, a little too truncated, could have used a little bit more development. But overall, I do like that ending. I just think we could have cut some of those things I didn't like earlier, like the Laura Harrington stuff, which is just nasty. Trim down the Emilio stuff, cut some of the repetitive gags that we have in here, and develop this ending a little bit more. Give it a couple, at least 5 more pages to just of him recovering, because it wraps up really goddamn quickly. But other than that, it's really solid, especially considering this is the first script of Shea Hatton's that he really put out there. And I'd say for a spec, this is one of the best specs I've read, and I picked this. I agreed. I decided I would do this because I normally don't do specs because I don't like shitting on amateur work, but this was really good, so I figured I'd praise it a little. I'd do something I could praise a little. And it's a shame this hasn't gotten made, but I can kind of understand why, because there's a lot of real people involved in this who are kind of portrayed comically and kind of villainous. Stephen King, I have a very solid feeling that he would have a sense of humor about it and he would be fine with it. But Emilio Estevez comes off like kind of a jackass in this. And you have AC/DC. I don't know how they would like their portrayal in this. Like, that would kind of go. I could see that being a problem. Laura Harrington doesn't have the clout of some of these other people, but I can't imagine she would be happy with her portrayal in this. It's extremely fucked up to portray her as this complete just, horrible person. So I could imagine like producers would look at this and go, this is a great calling card and we'd like to hire you, but we don't want to do this because we could run into legal issues. But yeah, as sort of a comedic exploration of Maximum Overdrive and King's foibles, so to speak, I think this is a really solid read and I think it's really good. I wish it could get made, but I know realistically it probably won't. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the episode, guys. I know this is going to be a very short one. And until next time, bye.